Cast your mind back, if you would, to 10-year-old you going to Shirley Oaks Homes. What was it like living there?
Well, the home itself and its surroundings were fine, no problem with that whatsoever, but it was an absolute viper's nest or a snake pit of paedophilia. And of course, I didn't realise that at the time, but it's become very apparent since. So much went on there, it was just unbelievable.
Because you were so young and because you've been
People were
sent
being
away...
sexually assaulted all over the place.
Sorry to cut across you, Philip. I was just saying that because you were so young, there's obviously a bit of delay on the line. Because you were so young and you'd never been to a home before, you didn't report what had happened to you. You apparently just thought that this was what happened in care homes.
Exactly. How do you get over that as a 10-year-old? And it was full of young people. Some were a bit older, of course, but on the whole, they were fairly young people. And you just assume that it must be normal. I've never seen this kind of behaviour before. But there we go. That's what happens in these places.
So what made you finally reveal what had happened to you all these years later?
Well, it's taken 60 years, basically. But I learned of the Rotherham girls, the young girls in Rotherham who were badly abused, and a couple of other places which became television news. I was looking at that one newscast and I thought, wow, I mean, if those girls have got the nerve to go forward and defend themselves in court, I should really support them and sort of use the responsibilities I've now got as an older person and as a grandfather to help anyone in that position. So I admire those girls. And my first step was go to Shirley Oaks, which was a lucky find, really, because I couldn't find... I remember the name Shirley, but I always thought it was Shirley Heights, which was the name of a Derby winner that I had a bet on one day later on in life. But in fact, Google changed the way it's presented the findings. It said others you might like to search, and one of them was Shirley Oaks came up, and I recognised it straight away then that I'd been making a mistake in the name. And that got me in. I phoned SOSA, their Survivors Association. They're tremendously helpful. They advised me that the first step to take was to the local police station and to file a complaint. That takes a lot of nerve, you know. You've got to admire these children that do that. I'm now 76. It's not a lot of nerve for me, but it's not something really you want to talk about too much. But anyhow, I went to the police station. They took a statement.
Sorry, I was just saying, you obviously, you know, it's not something you've wanted to talk about your whole life, but the fact that you've kept it buried doesn't necessarily mean that it hasn't had an effect on you. What impact has it had on your life?
Oh, it's had a tremendous effect. It's very hard to quantify it, really. I lost all my schooling when I left the home because I wouldn't go to school. I had what's now known as school phobia, but no one knew why because I wouldn't tell anyone. I refused to go to school, lost my tertiary education. And during those school days, when I would just nip across the playground, over the back wall and out of school, I would not attend school. And I became just streetwise, basically, for years. And in a way, that's held me in good stead later on in life, but that's the way it was then.
What do you know about the person that abused you?
Well, the police told me later that, and I have to say, before I go into that, the two policemen that helped me were tremendously helpful. I think Scotland Yard in the background wasn't quite so helpful. I'm sure they really messed up big time at one point, not with me, but with SOSA. But what helped me was that they believed what I was saying. The policeman had a similar experience himself, and it was a child abuse unit. They put me in touch with the historic child abuse unit in Scotland Yard. They came down and began to work with me, and they eventually found out that, or I found out that I wasn't the only one that had been abused by this guy. There had been literally dozens of them. And he'd gone off to, just after I left Shirley Oaks, I went back home. The guy had gone off to Ceylon, to a children's home there, where I've absolutely no doubt he continued to abuse children out there. But later on, he had died. So that was effectively the end of the case as far as Scotland Yard were concerned for me. But what I had been saying to them was corroborated by other people. And that's quite important. So personally, my experience with the police was they were very, very helpful, the two, unbelievably helpful. But I know there's a big background story going on here where one policeman before my case was told not to investigate other police. And we learnt that from a whistleblower within Shirley Oaks, who was a great help. So, and that needs to be exposed properly. And there should be a forensic investigation, a criminal investigation into what actually went on there. A young guy died. You know, he had a family, had friends. It must have terrified the other kids in the home there. I didn't know about that case at the time, but looking back, the way it's been handled is disgraceful. I mean, the policeman concerned is probably living on the Costa del Sol with a lot of other criminals that came out of the police forces and the crime squads in the 1960s and 70s, which again we've seen on television recently anyhow. But it's an absolute viper's pit.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that the inquiry has called for, potentially a criminal investigation into this. I mean, obviously, we don't know the full facts around it as yet, and that would also be the subject of any legal case. Just in terms of yourself, you've had a letter of apology from the council. You've been given a sum of compensation. Does that in any way redress what happened to you? Is there anything else that could be done to make things good?
No, none whatsoever. I mean, the money's sitting in the bank. It'll be left to the children later on when I die, presumably. The letter of apology was meaningless. It was a well-written letter, I can say that, but it's totally meaningless to me. What happened, and that hasn't yet been dealt with properly for the other children in the care home, not just me. There was hundreds of children went through that system. We owe it to them to investigate it properly, and that should be done in full consultation with SOSA, who have been working on this case for years and years, have been frustrated by Lambeth Borough Council and the police. It's about time they got it put together properly.